Thomas Reed wiped grease from his hands, gazing at the rusted hulk of a freighter he had spent the last week repairing. The Martian sunset cast a crimson glow across the barren landscape, a reminder of why he had chosen this quiet corner of the solar system. Far from the crowded metropolises of Earth and the political chaos of the Galactic Federation, life here was simple, and simple was good. He stepped into his modest workshop, the hum of old machinery a comforting soundtrack to his solitude. The clatter of tools was interrupted by a distant roar, a deep, rumbling sound that grew louder by the second. Thomas frowned, stepping outside just in time to see a streak of fire blazing across the sky. It was heading straight for his property. The impact shook the ground, sending a plume of dust and debris into the air. Thomas shielded his face, muttering curses as he stumbled toward the crash site. When the dust settled, he saw the remains of a small spacecraft embedded in the ground, its hull scorched and riddled with holes. Sparks flew from the wreckage, and a trail of greenish fluid leaked onto the red soil. Against his better judgment, Thomas approached cautiously. A soft groan emanated from the ship, followed by a metallic hiss as the hatch creaked open. Inside, he found a figure slumped in the cockpit, an alien, its grayish skin glistening with an otherworldly sheen. "Help! Me!" the creature rasped, its voice distorted but intelligible. Before Thomas could react, the alien's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. Its other hand revealed a small, glowing object, a crystalline device pulsing with an inner light. "You've been chosen," the alien gasped, pressing the device against Thomas's chest. Pain exploded through Thomas's body as the object fused into him, sending searing heat through his veins. He staggered back, clutching his chest, as the alien slumped lifelessly in its seat. "What the hell did you do to me?" Thomas shouted, but there was no answer. His confusion turned to panic as a shadow fell over him. Looking up, he saw a group of heavily armed figures descending from a sleek black shuttle. They moved with precision, their faces hidden behind visors that reflected the fiery crash site. "Secure the key," one of them barked. "Key? What key?" Thomas barely had time to process the words before they opened fire. Instinctively, he dove for cover, expecting to feel the sharp sting of a bullet, but instead, something extraordinary happened. A burst of energy erupted from his hands, forming a shimmering barrier that deflected the incoming shots. The mercenaries hesitated, their leader shouting commands. Thomas, now trembling and confused, felt a strange surge of power coursing through him. The device, whatever it was doing something to him, something impossible. "Stand down," the leader ordered, but Thomas was already running, adrenaline and fear propelling him toward his workshop. As he sprinted through the Martian dust, one thought consumed him: his quiet life was over, and he had no idea why. Thomas's hands trembled as he slammed the reinforced door of his workshop shut, locking it behind him. His heart pounded like a runaway engine, the alien device in his chest still burning faintly beneath his shirt. His mind raced with questions. What was that thing? Why did it pick me? He barely had time to catch his breath before the sound of heavy boots echoed outside. The mercenaries were fast, fanning out to encircle the building. "Thomas Reed," a cold, amplified voice called out. "We know you have the key. Surrender it now, and you might live." Thomas grabbed a nearby wrench, gripping it tightly despite knowing it was a useless defense against their high-tech arsenal. He peeked through a cracked window and saw their leader, a tall figure clad in sleek, black armor, motioning to the others. "We don't have time for games. Breach the door," the leader ordered. Thomas cursed under his breath, time to run. But just as he turned toward the back exit, the workshop systems flickered. Lights dimmed, and the ancient terminal in the corner sparked to life. A distorted voice, sharp and feminine, echoed from the speakers. "Do not run," it said. "You will not make it far." Thomas froze. "Who the hell?" "No time to explain," the voice interrupted. "I'm Rilke, and I can help you stay alive. For now, move to the console." The mercenaries' laser cutters began whining, slicing through the workshop door. Thomas hesitated but darted to the terminal. On screen, a crude wireframe face appeared, a rogue AI judging by the glitchy, uneven image. "Take the generator," Rilke instructed as a compartment hissed open nearby. Inside was a small, cylindrical power core. "I don't." "Just do it. You don't want them getting their hands on me or the key," the AI snapped. Thomas grabbed the generator just as the door burst open. The mercenaries swarmed in, shouting orders. Before Thomas could react, Rilke triggered a blinding pulse from the workshop's lights, forcing the soldiers to shield their visors. Out the back, Rilke barked. Thomas bolted, weaving through the dusty junkyard behind his workshop. The mercenaries recovered quickly, lasers scorching the air as they fired at his retreating figure. Thomas ducked behind a towering pile of scrap, panting heavily. "This isn't happening," he muttered, clutching his chest. The key pulsed, sending another strange jolt through him. He didn't have time to question it as Rilke's voice cut in again, this time through a small speaker on the generator. "They're tracking your biosignature. The key's energy signature makes you a beacon." "Fantastic," Thomas growled. "And your plan?" "Follow the coordinates I'm uploading to the generator. There's a shipyard nearby. I can unlock a freighter for you, but you'll need to move now." As the mercenaries closed in, Thomas sprinted for the coordinates. His mind was spinning, but one thing was clear. Whoever this Rilke was, she seemed to know more about the key than he did. And for now, that made her his best shot at survival. Behind him, his workshop exploded in a fiery burst, taking out several of the mercenaries. "That was my home," Thomas yelled. "You're welcome," Rilke quipped. "Now keep running." The freighter groaned as it lifted off, a patchwork of rusted metal and ancient thrusters shaking under the strain of atmospheric escape. Thomas gripped the controls tightly, sweat dripping from his brow as alarms blared around him. "This thing is barely holding together," he shouted. "Relax," Rilke's voice chimed through the cockpit speakers. "It's held together by optimism and duct tape. You'll make it. Probably." "Probably?" "Focus on not crashing. You can yell at me later." Thomas gritted his teeth as the freighter broke through Mars's thin atmosphere. The console lit up with alerts, multiple ships in pursuit. A glance at the radar confirmed his worst fear. 3 sleek interceptors were closing fast, each bearing the insignia of the Dominion Consortium. "Wonderful," Thomas muttered. "And who are these guys?" "Dominion bounty hunters. Professional, relentless, and very well armed," Rilke explained. "They want the key to boost their war efforts. You're basically carrying a galactic doomsday button, and they'll kill you to get it." "Great. Any bright ideas?" "Hold tight." The freighter systems whirred to life as Rilke took over, her rogue AI coding overriding the ship's outdated programming. Thrusters flared, and the freighter banked hard, narrowly avoiding a barrage of laser fire. "Try not to die," Rilke added. "I've grown oddly fond of your whining." Thomas gripped the console as the freighter dove into an asteroid belt, jagged rocks spinning dangerously close. He swore under his breath, adrenaline surging as Rilke weaved the ship through the debris. Behind them, the interceptors followed, their advanced systems closing the gap. "Any chance you can turn this thing into a warship?" Thomas asked. "Does it look like I have a magic button for that?" Rilke snapped. "This is a cargo hauler, not a fighter. Your best weapon right now is not getting hit." As if to mock her, a laser bolt grazed the freighter's hull, sending sparks flying. Thomas clenched his fists, feeling the strange pulse of the key beneath his ribs. It felt alive, feeding on his fear and anger. "Whatever you're about to do, don't," Rilke warned, noticing the energy spike in the ship's sensors. "I don't know what I'm doing," Thomas shouted back. Another laser blast rocked the ship. This time, the key acted on its own, unleashing a surge of golden energy through the freighter. The glow expanded outward, forming a shield that deflected the incoming fire. "Okay," Rilke said, impressed despite herself. "That's new." Thomas barely had time to process what had happened before the shield dissipated. The strain left him gasping for air, his vision swimming. "Yeah, don't do that too often," Rilke said. "You're going to fry yourself." The freighter burst free from the asteroid field and into open space. Ahead, a distant jump gate flickered, its shimmering portal a potential escape. "Punch it," Rilke urged. Thomas slammed the throttle forward. The freighter surged ahead, and just as the interceptors closed in, they vanished into the gate's glowing vortex. When the ship emerged on the other side, Thomas collapsed into the pilot's seat, exhaustion overtaking him. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Far enough to catch our breath," Rilke replied, "but not far enough to be safe. The bounty on your head will keep growing, and every faction in the galaxy is going to come after us." Thomas buried his face in his hands, groaning. "All I wanted was a quiet life." Rilke chuckled dryly. "Well, Thomas Reed, quiet doesn't exist when you're carrying the most dangerous artifact in the galaxy. Welcome to the big leagues." He looked out the viewport at the endless stretch of stars. For the first time, he realized the galaxy wasn't as vast as it seemed, not when everyone in it was hunting you. The freighter drifted in the shadow of an asteroid, its engines quiet to avoid detection. Thomas leaned over the cockpit console, his eyes fixed on the looming planet ahead. Its surface shimmered with violet clouds and crystalline spires that jutted into the stratosphere. "This is it?" Thomas asked, skepticism thick in his voice. "Welcome to Vega's Refuge," Rilke said, her tone uncharacteristically serious. "Home of the Arcanum Collective. If anyone knows how to deal with the key, it's them. And you're sure they won't try to kill me?" "No," Rilke replied flatly, "but they're less likely than everyone else." Thomas sighed, his exhaustion mounting. The past few weeks had been an endless cycle of running, fighting, and questioning his sanity. Every time he thought he was safe, another faction or bounty hunter showed up, each more ruthless than the last. He didn't trust anyone, not even the sarcastic A who had saved his life more times than he could count. Still, the promise of answers was too tempting to ignore. The docking platform shimmered with alien light as Thomas stepped off the freighter, the key pulsing faintly beneath his skin. A group of figures emerged to greet him, their flowing robes adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe as he looked at them. "Thomas Reed," one of them said, their voice smooth and precise. "We've been expecting you." The leader, an alien with translucent skin and glowing eyes, gestured for Thomas to follow. He hesitated but obeyed, Rilke's voice crackling in his earpiece. "Be careful. These guys play the long game. If they think you're a threat, they won't hesitate to neutralize you." Thomas ignored her, his focus on the towering crystalline structure that dominated the horizon. Inside, the air hummed with energy. The walls glowed faintly, responding to their presence as they moved deeper into the collective sanctuary. The chamber they entered was vast and circular, filled with alien technology that looked more like art than machinery. The leader approached a pedestal in the center, motioning for Thomas to stand before it. "The key you carry is both a gift and a curse," the leader began, their glowing eyes fixed on Thomas. "It is tied to an ancient threat that few understand. The Veilborn is awakening, and you are its chosen adversary." Thomas frowned. "Chosen? I didn't sign up for this." "Neither did any hero," the leader replied. The collective began their analysis, surrounding Thomas with holographic projections and scanning equipment. He felt exposed and uneasy, the key's pulse growing stronger as if it sensed the scrutiny. Just as the leader stepped forward with a grim expression, an explosion rocked the sanctuary. Thomas spun around as alarms blared. Through the shattered doorway stormed a squad of mercenaries, led by Kara Avon. Her piercing gaze locked onto him, and a smirk crossed her face. "Sorry to crash the party," she said, aiming her blaster. but that key doesn't belong to you." Chaos erupted. The Arcanum Collective, unprepared for a direct assault, scrambled to defend their sanctuary. Thomas, caught in the crossfire, felt the key surge again. This time, he couldn't hold it back. Golden energy erupted from him, sending attackers and defenders alike sprawling. When the light faded, the chamber lay in ruins, and Thomas stood alone in the wreckage. Kara, stunned but alive, stared at him in disbelief. "You have no idea what you're holding, do you?" Thomas glared at her. "No, and I'm starting to think I don't want to know." Behind him, the remaining collective members whispered among themselves. For the first time, Thomas realized just how dangerous he had become, not just to his enemies, but to anyone near him. Kara lowered her weapon slightly. "We need to talk." Thomas didn't trust her, but he was out of options. The galaxy was closing in, and he couldn't survive it alone. The air in the ruined chamber felt heavy, the debris strewn across the floor like the remnants of a forgotten war. Thomas stood at the center, his breathing shallow, his mind racing. The pulse of the key had subsided for the moment, but the power it had unleashed still thrummed in his veins. He felt a deep, unsettling connection to it, like it was no longer something he could control, but something that controlled him. Kara Avon was the first to move, stepping through the smoke and dust with a cautious, calculating gait. She didn't lower her weapon entirely, but her posture was less aggressive than before. "You've got the power of God and no clue how to use it," she said, her tone more measured now. "That much is obvious." Thomas shot her a look, his jaw clenched. "I didn't ask for this." Kara shrugged, her eyes hard and knowing. "No one does, not until it's too late." Rilke's voice crackled in his ear. "Do not listen to her. She's after the key, Thomas. Don't forget that." Thomas ignored the A's warning, keeping his eyes fixed on Kara. He'd dealt with enough betrayal to recognize the signs, but he was too tired to be suspicious. "I don't have time for this," Thomas muttered, turning to the collective members who were still trying to regroup. The explosion had thrown the sanctuary into chaos, and the glowing holograms flickered erratically. What the hell just happened? And what is the Veilborn? The leader of the collective, a being of translucent skin and glowing eyes, stepped forward, their expression grim. "The Veilborn are a race older than any of us. They existed long before the Arcanum, the Dominion, or even humanity. Their time is coming again, and the key you carry is a weapon meant to stop them, or to ensure they succeed." "Stop them? What, like destroy the galaxy?" Thomas scoffed. "Not exactly," the leader continued, their voice steady. "The Veilborn's power is not of this world. They feed on entropy, the collapse of order. They are chaos incarnate. The key is a tool, but it can be used as a lock if one knows how to wield it." "You're telling me this thing can stop them?" Thomas asked, his voice rising with frustration. "It can, but only if you understand it." Before Thomas could respond, a loud crash from the entrance of the sanctuary interrupted them. The floor shook as a new wave of mercenaries stormed in, their weapons raised. But this time, they weren't alone. A large figure, draped in dark, flowing robes and armored in black, entered the chamber. His presence filled the room, and even the collective members recoiled in fear. The air grew cold, and the lights dimmed as if reacting to his presence. Kara's expression hardened, but she didn't speak. The man looked directly at Thomas, his voice deep and resonant. "I'm here for the key," the man said. His voice seemed to vibrate the very air around them. "And you, Thomas Reed, are the last person who should be holding it." The energy in the room shifted, growing tense and charged with the kind of power that made Thomas's skin crawl. He instinctively reached for the key beneath his shirt, but it pulsed in response, as if it recognized the threat. "Who the hell are you?" Thomas demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. The man smiled, though it was more a show of teeth than anything resembling kindness. "I am the Herald of the Veilborn," he said. "And you, Thomas Reed, are standing in the way of the end of all things. The collective leader stepped forward, raising a hand. You have no idea what you're meddling with, Krillix. Leave now, or I will end you. Krillix's smile widened. You cannot stop the inevitable, and neither can he. He gestured toward Thomas, who felt a chill run down his spine. Why is everyone always saying that? Thomas muttered, frustration boiling over. I didn't ask for this. The herald's gaze softened, but there was no compassion in it. You never do, he said. But it doesn't matter. You will either fall in line with the Veilborn's design, or you will be crushed beneath it. Rilke's voice rang in his ear, urgent and strained. You need to act now. The key's power is still unstable. If you don't take control, he will. Thomas swallowed hard, the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. He didn't have a choice, but for the first time, he wondered if he ever truly had a choice in any of this. The tension in the room was suffocating. Krillix, the herald of the Veilborn, stood like a shadow, his dark robes flowing unnaturally, as if they existed in a space beyond the physical. The collective, their glowing eyes flickering with uncertainty, recoiled, unsure how to handle the force that was about to descend upon them. Thomas felt the key pulse again, its energy surging through him like a flood. It wasn't just a tool, it was a part of him now, a constant burning presence. He didn't understand it, but he could feel its power, the raw potential to reshape the fabric of the universe if he could unlock it. The problem was, he didn't know how. Krillix's voice, deep and resonant, broke the silence. You still don't understand, do you? The Veilborn are inevitable. They were here before any of you, and they will be here long after your precious collective has crumbled to dust. Thomas didn't respond immediately. The weight of Krillix's words settled on his shoulders, suffocating him. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. The future of the entire galaxy hung in the balance. And he was at the center of it, holding the key, whether he wanted it or not. I won't let you have it, Thomas said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. Krillix chuckled, the sound like the echo of a death knell. You don't have a choice. You are already part of this. The key is bound to you, and the Veilborn will stop at nothing to see their power restored. Rilke's voice suddenly broke in, more frantic than usual. Thomas, you need to fight back now. The key's energy is starting to destabilize. If you don't control it, he will. Thomas clenched his fists, feeling the electricity coursing through him. He had no choice. He had to take control. He had to. The herald of the Veilborn extended his hand, and the air around him rippled, distorting the light in the room. A pressure, almost tangible, bore down on Thomas as Krillix spoke again. It's time to accept your fate, Thomas Reed. Without warning, Krillix raised his other hand, and a shockwave of dark energy shot forward, crashing into Thomas with an almost physical force. He staggered backward, barely staying on his feet, the key beneath his shirt pulsing violently in response. The energy in the room fluctuated, and for a split second, everything went quiet. Then, in an explosion of golden light, Thomas released the full force of the key's power. The surge of energy slammed into Krillix's dark aura, sending a shockwave through the room that sent everyone flying. Thomas could feel the weight of the power, like an extension of his will, but it wasn't just his energy, it was the key's. It was both a gift and a curse, and it was feeding on his fear, his anger, his desperation. He had no control over it. No, Thomas shouted, struggling to rein in the power that had been unleashed. He could feel the dark energy of the Veilborn pressing in on him, but the key fought back. The power wasn't just a weapon, it was a defense. It kept the herald at bay, but it also kept Thomas from thinking clearly, from controlling his own body. Krillix staggered, clearly shaken by the force of the attack, but he quickly regained his composure, a twisted grin forming on his face. You think you can stop me with this? He sneered. You're just a child playing with fire. But there was something in Thomas now, a flicker of understanding. He wasn't just reacting to the energy anymore. The key was calling to him, not as a weapon, but as a guide. If he could just focus, just feel it. For a split second, the chaos around him quieted and everything went still. The world slowed as Thomas locked his focus onto the key. He understood finally. The key wasn't just a tool. It was a bridge between him and the power of the Veilborn. But he could use it, not to destroy, but to seal them away. With a scream, Thomas channeled all of his will into the key, and the golden light surged outward again. This time, it wasn't just a blast, it was a wave, sweeping through the room, annihilating Krellix's dark energy and pushing the Herald of the Veilborn back. The room shook with the force of the blast. The collective members looked on, stunned, as Thomas collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. He felt the key's presence in his chest, calming but insistent, still thrumming beneath his skin. Rilke's voice, now softer, almost concerned, spoke in his ear. "You did it, but you can't keep doing this. The more you tap into that power, the more it'll control you." Thomas nodded weakly, still dizzy from the energy surge. "I don't know how much longer I can keep it under control." But even as he spoke, the distant hum of incoming ships filled the air. The fight was far from over, and for the first time, Thomas realized the true weight of what he had just done. The room was silent, save for the distant hum of the collective's failing systems. The golden light from the key had faded, but the air still crackled with residual energy. Thomas sat on the cold stone floor, his hands trembling as he fought to steady his breathing. His body ached, the after-effects of the energy surge overwhelming his senses. He could feel the key still pulsing within him, like a heartbeat that wasn't his own. Rilke's voice echoed in his ear, urgent and strained. "You're alive, but not for long if you don't move." Thomas blinked, struggling to focus. He could hear the sounds of footsteps echoing from the hallway outside the chamber. Krellix was recovering, and it wouldn't be long before the Herald regrouped and came for him again. But this time, Thomas was different. As he pushed himself up, the key's presence inside him felt more familiar, less alien. He could feel its hum in his bones, an uncomfortable, unrelenting rhythm. It was as if the key was now a part of his varied being, and the power that had once felt like a curse was starting to feel like a potential weapon, one he could wield, if he could just master it. Thomas took a deep breath. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, Rilke. This power, it's too much." "You have to control it," Rilke replied, her voice a mixture of caution and concern. "The more you give in, the harder it will be to pull back. But if you don't stop Krellix, the galaxy will fall. It's your choice, Thomas." He didn't have a choice. The galaxy's future, his future, was tied to the key, and the Veilborn wouldn't stop until they had it. The footsteps outside the chamber grew louder, and Thomas's mind raced. He wasn't sure how much time he had, but he couldn't sit idly by. Krellix would come for him, and when he did, the Herald would be ready. But Thomas wasn't sure if he was ready for what came next. He didn't want to become the monster they all feared. Just as he was about to stand, the door exploded inward with a violent crash, sending debris flying across the room. Thomas barely had time to react before a figure stormed in, dark and imposing. It was Krellix. His eyes burned with fury, and the air around him rippled as though it couldn't contain his power. He was no longer the calm, calculating foe Thomas had first encountered. Now he was the embodiment of rage, a force of destruction. "You've made a mistake," Krellix snarled, his voice like the sound of tearing fabric. "You think you can stop the Veilborn with this?" He gestured at Thomas, his eyes narrowing. "You're a child playing at war." Thomas didn't respond. He couldn't afford to. The key was stirring again, sensing the presence of its ancient adversary. The golden light began to flare up once more, but this time, Thomas struggled to hold onto it. The energy was wild and untamed, surging inside him like an uncontrollable beast. He needed control. I'm not here to stop you, Krelix, Thomas said, his voice steady but firm. I'm here to end this. With a sharp cry, Thomas channeled the key's power, but this time, he didn't try to direct it in a wild surge. Instead, he focused, allowing the power to flow through him, fluid, controlled, like a river through his veins. The energy wrapped around him, cocooning him in a shield of golden light. He could feel the Veilborn's dark energy trying to tear at the barrier, but the key held firm. For the first time, Thomas felt like he was in control. Krelix's face twisted with frustration as he lunged forward, his hands crackling with dark energy. The two forces collided with an earth-shattering impact. Thomas felt the weight of the Herald's power pressing against him, but the key fought back, pushing him forward. The golden light began to envelop the room, pushing the shadows back and stripping them of their strength. You can't defeat me, Krelix growled, struggling to maintain his hold. You're nothing but a man with a weapon. You can't stand against the Veilborn. I'm not just a man, Thomas retorted, his eyes blazing with newfound determination. I'm the one who's going to stop them. The key pulsed, the light intensifying. The energy inside Thomas surged in a final desperate push, forcing Krelix back with a violent burst of power. The Herald was thrown to the ground, his dark energy dissipating like smoke. For a brief moment, Thomas thought he had won, but Krelix's smile never faded. It's not over, Thomas, he spat. The Veilborn are already here, and you're just the beginning. As Krelix vanished into the shadows, the weight of his words hung heavily in the air. Thomas had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the soft hum of the key as it pulsed in Thomas's chest. His chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath, the golden glow slowly fading but leaving an unsettling warmth in its wake. His mind was a whirl of thoughts and emotions, everything crashing together: fear, anger, confusion, but above all, a sense of foreboding. Krelix had retreated, but his words lingered like a curse. The Veilborn weren't gone, they were still coming, and Thomas could feel it in his bones. He had defeated one herald, but there would be more, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could rely on the key. The collective members were still recovering, picking themselves up from the shockwave that had ravaged the sanctuary. Their glowing eyes flickered with a mix of awe and trepidation as they regarded Thomas, still unsure of the full extent of his power. Kara Avon, who had stood on the sidelines, finally approached him, her expression unreadable. I don't know what that was, she said quietly, her eyes shifting to the remnants of the destroyed sanctuary. But you're not like anyone else I've ever seen. I thought the key was a myth, just another weapon. But you? Her voice trailed off, as though the words she wanted to say couldn't find their way to her lips. I didn't ask for this, Thomas replied, his voice strained. But it's mine now, and I don't know how to control it. Kara didn't respond at first, her gaze hardening as she looked at him. No one can control something like that. But that doesn't matter. What matters is what you're going to do with it. Thomas stared at her, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. The responsibility was crushing. He didn't want to be the galaxy's protector. He didn't want to carry the key's burden, its power, its promises. But he had no choice. The Veilborn will come for it, he said softly, as much to himself as to Kara, and they won't stop until they get it. I don't know if I can stop them. You can, Kara said, her tone soft but resolute. Because you have something they don't, humanity. You're more than just a weapon. You're the one who can change the game. The key is a means, not an end, but it's your will that will shape the future. Thomas didn't reply. Instead, he looked at the key, still thrumming faintly beneath his shirt. It had saved him, but it had also shown him just how fragile his control over it was. He could feel the connection deep inside, like a nerve that was always pulsing, always pulling at him. Rilke's voice broke into his thoughts. You've done well, Thomas, but this isn't over. You need to find the others, those who can help you. Who else is out there? Thomas asked, his voice sharp with urgency. "You won't be alone," Rilke responded. "There are others who have been chosen, scattered across the galaxy. They are tied to the key, like you. Together, you might stand a chance." "But how do I find them?" Thomas asked. "I'll guide you," Rilke replied. "It won't be easy, but it's the only way forward. You can't defeat the Veilborn alone." Thomas turned back to Kara, whose face was now filled with determination. "The Veilborn won't stop, and neither will we." She nodded, offering him a small, grim smile. "No one ever wins a war by sitting still. We move forward, one step at a time." The weight of the galaxy seemed to press down on Thomas as he stood. He wasn't sure if he was ready for the journey ahead, but the future of the galaxy was in his hands now. There was no going back. As he turned to leave the ruined sanctuary, a new resolve began to settle within him. The road would be long, and the stakes higher than he ever imagined, but he wasn't alone. And for the first time since this madness began, Thomas Reed felt the glimmer of hope. It was small, fragile, but it was there, just waiting to be shaped into something more. Something that could stop the Veilborn and protect the galaxy from their endless hunger. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun.